Hello, and welcome to Required Reading, a podcast that revisits the most impactful books from our childhood. My name is Erin Bowles. I am a writer, actor, and I have a bread machine. Our guest today is Krista Moy. She is a screenwriter, comedian, voice actor, artist, and cat mom based in LA. She has written for the card game The Queer Agenda and the Asian satirical news publication The Lunar Times. She created the web series Food Babies, the ASMR show, and the Twitch comedy talk show Moy Meets World. Her favorite hobbies are healing her emotional trauma, buying too many plants, and karaoke. And you can see her perform stand-up at the Hollywood Comedy and all around LA. Hi, Krista.
Hi, Erin. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. Our book today is a play. It is Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. And just going to put it up at the top, this play, if you're not familiar with it, deals with themes of domestic violence, sexual assault, and suicide. So if that's not how you want to spend your day, all good.
Yeah,
we'll see you next
big
time.
trigger warning there.
Yep. And so it was first performed December 3rd, 1947. 1947 is the first year of the Cold War. It is when the House of Un-American Activities begins investigating communism in Hollywood. SAG implements an anti-communist loyalty oath. There's the Hollywood 10 who are blacklisted. Truman creates the CIA, Department of Defense, and the National Security Council. The doomsday clock of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is introduced. Jackie Robinson becomes the first African American to play Major League Baseball since the 1880s, and Wataru Misaka makes the roster of the New York Knicks and becomes the first person of color to play in modern professional basketball. And the Soviet Union completes development of the AK-47 rifle. The Diary of Anne Frank is published, and H&M opens its first store in Sweden.
Oh, wow. H&M?
Yeah.
That far back?
I didn't know it
Yeah.
was Swedish.
I didn't know that it originated there. That's really cool.
Playwright is Tennessee Williams. He was born Thomas Lanier Williams III in Columbus, Mississippi in 1911. His father was a traveling shoe salesman who was an alcoholic and frequently away from home and had a violent temper. He was a sickly child. His mother was deeply unhappy in the marriage and so really focused on him, and they lived with his preacher grandfather. His father pulls him out of college to work in a shoe factory. He has a mental breakdown and leaves, but Stanley Kowalski, who's one of the characters in this play, is inspired by one of his coworkers at the factory. He goes back to school, drops out, and then studies at the dramatic workshop at the new school. And he said, "Then and there, the theater and I found each other, for better and for worst. I know it's the only thing that saved my life." He moved to New Orleans in 1939 to work for the Works Progress Administration. He was close with his, I believe, older sister Rose. She is diagnosed with schizophrenia, and then in 1943 she is lobotomized, and she has to be institutionalized for the rest of her life. Williams funds her care and is supposed to have influenced characters in The Glass Menagerie and Streetcar. Glass Menagerie is his first big hit, comes out in 1944. 3 years later, we get Streetcar, and he wins a Pulitzer for it. So, all that being said, Krista, how did this come into your life? How did this come to you?
So this came to me first in the 11th grade. I was about 16 years old, and it was a required reading for my English class. My favorite English teacher, Miss Kaiser. It all ended up very kismet because I was really shy at the time, and I didn't like reading aloud. I would never volunteer for any class readings. It was just too much pressure for me.
Yeah.
It was way too much because I just wasn't a confident reader. I was a little slow, but she assigned me the role of Blanche Dubois.
Oh my God.
Yes. And I realized how many lines Blanche had, and I was like, oh no, I started to get nervous, but this felt really different. The more I got to know her character and just really drop into the role, I had never really experienced acting before. This was my first time reading a play like this and having a role assigned to me. So it just felt so effortless and interactive, having the different classmates reading different parts. It was way better than just reading a paragraph and then going on to the someone else reads another paragraph, how typical school reading is.
Right.
So I really started to feel the emotions and like give to this character and like embody Blanche in a way that was very unexpected. And I didn't really know at the time what was happening, but all I knew was it was exciting and it was thrilling to be Blanche. And so she continued each day that we would read, she would assign me Blanche every day. And I was just like, yes, like I accepted the task and I loved it. And it was the first time that I'd ever really felt connected with a character in such a way.
That's amazing. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty magical. And being so naive at 16, like I didn't really, I think, grasp the themes of the play. I think I sort of knew that it was like hinting at something like dark or bad, but I didn't really understand that Stella's in a domestically violent relationship marriage with Stanley. I didn't really understand fully that Blanche was married to a closeted gay man and that like she sort of in a way drove him to suicide and then later like had guilt over it, and that inevitably she is raped by Stanley in the end, which, you know, it's alluded to. It's not explicitly said. And then Stanley, you know, like it's just sort of like, oh wow, that's what happens. And so I think for me, it was my own trauma that I hadn't really dealt with. You know, I'm a survivor of sexual childhood abuse, and also I didn't know at the time I was queer. So like there were many themes that hadn't really unfolded in my life yet that I hadn't named, and that this book kind of pointed toward. And the fact that I was assigned Blanche later in life, I was like, wow, like this is pretty wild that this character that's gone through so much trauma, I actually identify a lot with like some of the things she's gone through. Not to like get too heavy with it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. I am still like, this is wild that this was in high school. I think for a teacher to give that to you.
Yeah.
Because I think, at least in my high school, we had to read a Shakespeare play every year, I think starting in middle school. Other than that, I think we like read one my senior year that was South African and it was dealing with apartheid. And every time we talked about plays, everyone was sort of like, I went to a very small high school, everyone was like, oh, that's Erin's thing. She's gonna like get a real big kick out of it. We'll all like go on to the next thing, it'll be fine. But this is just so meaty, and I was trying to figure out when I read it, and I think it might have been my senior year of high school. I don't know how I was introduced to it. I think probably through the movie. I've always had a real big love for classic Hollywood.
Same.
And the cast is almost identical from the original production, except for Blanche, who was Jessica Tandy, who was a British actress, did a couple screen roles, but really was a huge stage star, and but eventually got an Oscar for Driving Miss Daisy. And I just have to shout out, Carl Malden plays Mitch, and he is one of my favorite actors of all time. He's
so good. What else is he in? He's so familiar.
He's in everything. But yet I can't be like, I can't tell you. Like, I don't know.
Right. Like, he's one of those faces you just, you're like, I know that face, but I can't name where I know it.
He's always playing, like, second fiddle. He's always playing sort of like a schleb. I don't even know how to describe it.
Just like a really common guy.
And he plays it with such depth and such nuance and always breaks your heart. He is a memoir I really want to read. But when you picked this, you texted me and you were like, I don't know if this fits. Like, is this too out there? And I loved that you picked this because we are both actors. We are both in entertainment. And I so badly wanted to see the seeds of that, you know, where that started. And I mean, it deserves the Pulitzer. It deserves everything. It is such a phenomenal work. And that is so wild that your teacher did that and continued to pick you. That's what you hope a teacher is, to find.
Yeah. I feel like she just saw something in me probably after I read it the first time and was like, oh, this girl actually like might need this. Like, I don't know. And she seemed like a theater person or somebody that appreciated plays and things like that, because later we wrote like a one-act play that I actually just like found recently. My parents like sent it to
Wow.
me with my yearbooks that I asked for in the mail, and like I was going through this play and she's like writing all these notes. She's like, this is so funny, like how did you come up with this? And I was like, wow, like she recognized that I was a comedy queen, like even back in the 11th grade before I even knew
Oh
that
my
I was a
gosh.
comedian. Like she saw it and was like, this is funny. And like great dialogue, great character descriptions, like all these notes are just like so encouraging. And I'm so glad that I have this play that I wrote in
Oh,
her class,
yeah.
and that she assigned that to me as something that
Yeah.
I could discover about myself, because now, I love screenwriting and it's one of my favorite things, because it's just like creating these characters and giving them life and putting myself and my life experiences into them is like
Yeah.
one of the best feelings.
Elia Kazan said something about Tennessee Williams that was everything in his plays comes from his life and everything in his life comes from his plays. And
Yeah.
Tennessee Williams is such a there is such a hardness in his work that is also such a
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability and
Yeah.
such a gift. I think that he like lived with a lot of the same fears that what happened to Rose would happen to him, and I think characters like
Mm-hmm.
Blanche really reflect that. And
Mm-hmm.
just I was a little worried about this episode because I feel like I can't talk about it. I feel like I just sit back and be like, man, that's good. Like, damn.
Yeah. And like it's interesting, the film adaptation of it.
Mm,
That's like what keeps coming back to me about this play, is that at the time, like he was talking about things that were just unheard of to talk
yeah.
about. Like it was at a time where if your kids can't watch this with you, like it shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
exist, kind of thinking. So like to go where he went
Mm-hmm.
was so bold, but also so needed.
Yeah. As I was reading it, I kept being like, this has to be like late 50s. And it's late 40s. It is immediately
Yeah.
out of the first year of the Cold War.
Yeah.
Mind blowing. And it's so electric and so charged.
Mhm.
There's like an immediate tremendous amount of tension, and I think he is such an incredible writer. Like everything is amazing. To like the character introductions and descriptions are so meaty and fantastic.
Mhm.
And even on the page, you can feel the incredible fragility of Blanche, and it's in these
Yes.
she can't even be in direct light. He describes her as delicate, her movements suggest a moth.
Yeah.
It's just so good.
I know. And like moths to me are like they're like 50% dust. Like they like hardly exist in a matter form. They're like mostly air and dust
Mm,
because that's what they eat is like lint. And so when you like smash a moth, it just turns to dust.
yeah.
And that is such a great description of Blanche, and in stark contrast to Stanley, where like the first opening scene that we meet him, he's literally throwing raw meat at his wife.
Yeah.
And like that is just, you get it. Like
Yeah.
immediately you know exactly who he is. He's
Yeah.
that guy.
Yeah. And I also feel like it's Vivian Lee struggled with mental illness, especially near the end of her life. And I think playing
Mhm.
Blanche, the lines really started to blur between what was her and what was Blanche. And
Yeah.
with Marlon Brando, I think it's a very similar thing of like, where does the character end and where does the person begin? And I
Right.
embodies the character and also embodies how we think of him, I think, is the same brutality and the same hardness. And I was really interested in the fact that they kept coming back to that he's Polish American. And I looked it up. Polish Americans during World War II were only 4% of the American population, made up
Mm.
8% of the US military and armed forces. And I think were like very energetically volunteered as soon as the war started. And there was, I think, a lot of like, I think Stanley takes a lot of pride in that. And I think something consistent, except for maybe Stella, these characters are so deeply rooted in their past and it is so inescapable. And I think with Stella, it's maybe she's so deeply rooted in this moment. And
Mhm.
and I think when I first read this, it was obviously like Blanche needs a lot of help. Blanche is the character with the
Yes.
problems. And every additional time I visit it, everyone here needs
Yeah.
so much help.
Yeah, and I think that's like kind of the beauty of like revisiting it is when I first read it, I was like, oh, this woman is crazy. Like she is just, she's unhinged. And the more you get to absorb the story of it, and that she comes from this very wealthy upbringing, and like the men in her family have squandered the wealth and left her family with nothing, and then she goes through all this death in her family and the property and the loss, and then her husband commits suicide. Like, this is a lot to hold. On top of that, she's like she's someone that yearns for innocence and youth and beauty and art, and to have to experience such dark, heavy experiences in life. No wonder she's dissociating and delusional and just trying to cope through her like fantasies. Like, one of my favorite lines is that she's like, I don't want realism, I want magic. Like, it's so relatable to just people that have gone through it. And they don't want what's real because that's too much. And even the censorship of this in the film, it's like they thought it was too much. And it's like, well, what does that say about people's lives who have gone through things like this? Like, they must feel like, I can't even talk about this is like too much.
You were talking about listening to our Catcher in the Rye episode, and I think both with that and this, the sensation as a reader and a viewer is so much like, these are things we can't talk about.
Yes.
And that these are things that Tennessee Williams himself dealt with, and he was a queer man, and I can't believe I didn't mention that in my introduction of him. And yet I have such respect for it on a craft level, and also such a personal level of like, this is such a hard thing and a wonderful thing to give to us and to everyone. I think that's something about him that like he's very well known for, but like is just gonna look it in the face and is so messy and so raw and yet so beautiful. Glass Menagerie I've seen, it didn't really do anything for me, but like Night of the Iguana I think is Tennessee Williams, and I've seen the movie of that, and that is just the same thing of like, it is sweaty, everyone is bursting at the seams, it is raw.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one. I wish I've seen more of Tennessee Williams and read more, but this is the only one that I've actually digested and just like couldn't get, like, it literally has haunted me since the first time I read it. Like, it just stays with you. Like, it'll just come up to my mind in various times in my life. And the dialogue, it literally, you can't forget these lines.
There are so many really iconic lines, like the magic of it. Kindness of strangers is one of the last lines. And yet in reading it, I'm also pulling out all of these lines that I don't think ever made an impact on me, and yet are so meaty and so telling. Even like, this is right at the top. I think in English class is always like, where does the title come from? What does the title mean? And of course the play is so much about desire, but when Blanche comes in, she says, I had to take a streetcar named Desire to a streetcar named Cemeteries to Elysian Fields. And if you don't know, Elysian Fields or Elysian Fields was part of Greek mythology. It was like the VIP section of the underworld, where like heroes and people chosen by gods get to like really live it up and indulge and do all their favorite things.
That's intentional.
That's
not a mistake. That's not a coincidence.
And it's a streetcar named Cemeteries. It's so... I keep doing that. I keep just being like, damn, wow.
Damn. Yeah, like the writing is just, even like the scene where she's talking to Mitch at the end and kind of laying it all out and talking so truthfully with him, and then the flower lady comes and she's like, flores para los muertos, and like literally calling back this theme of death and mourning and grief that has been following Blanche and why she left Laurel. And it's like she can't escape it. Like, even in the midst of her like delusions, it finds a way to her to pull her back. Like, this is your grief.
Yeah.
And it's there. And like she
Yeah.
literally can't escape it.
And I think she gets married like right out of college. So she would be like
Yeah.
2021. She is, I think, around 30, or she's
Yeah.
described that. There is a motif of the blue piano and the music throughout, but there is also the motif of the recurring song that was playing when her husband died.
Yeah.
And I think I was both like a decade, and it is still this raw, and it is still this difficult that a single song can set you off. And yet it's such a cumulative thing. I think that probably isn't the first cut, but is certainly one of the deepest. And it's also like such a, the way I interpreted it is like that was such a loss of innocence because she really, really, truly loved this person. And I think
she did.
It is such a hard thing to be cheated on, like the really clear hurts, and then you get to the more softer hurts of like it's not even about you, it's just that it is a societal thing, it is a structural thing,
the societal like homophobia that was just ingrained in people. Like it was seen as like, I don't know what the term was, they were like demoral or demented. It was like just like
it's akin
completely
to
frowned upon.
A mental illness, to and what other option did her husband have to be discovered with another man in Mississippi in the 40s, or I guess even in the 30s? What a drastic measure that also feels like a logical measure.
And for him to be married to Blanche in the first place, like what else? What were his options? Like that was so common. She was probably a safe haven, if anything, because they could relate on so many things and had similar interests. And he wrote poetry, like, you know, I totally get it. I love him, and I didn't, like he's barely a character.
Yeah, you said like she is such a delicate person, and I think any life would be hard for Blanche, and she was dealt like the worst set of cards. And I think like this, if he had been straight, would be such a balm. Like they did connect on so many things. He like really also had the want for magic and poetry and beauty and art. Just what a sad lady. And yet like
I know
she is trying so hard to keep it together, and that is so incredible. And the thing that really struck me, I think, this time reading it is for maybe like the middle third, Blanche is the voice of reason, trying to get Stella out of this relationship.
Like she recognizes she has an aversion to violence, which like I think most people should. I think that's healthy. But she's amongst this. Everybody's violent around her. The neighbors are yelling and hitting each other upstairs. Eunice and her husband, and apparently like this isn't the first time Stanley has hit Stella, because Eunice says that. She's like, oh, I hope that they turn the hose on you like last time. So this is a reoccurring thing, and it's very normalized in this French Quarter kind of setting. And Blanche is like, wait a minute, y'all. Like, this is not okay. She's very protective of Stella. And she's very like hyper vigilant in the way she's interacting with people, because she knows like what they're capable of. And especially Stanley, she's like, I think her kind of flirting with him and being charming might seem like, oh, that's just part of her being like a loose woman or this very like flirtatious woman. But rereading it, I'm like, I think she's actually trying to disarm him. And she even says, like, a man like that, you can't stop unless you get him into bed, and that's your job. And so she knows that like the only way to subside a violent man like that is to use your sexuality. And so I think that's something that she does, and she learns, and she's probably learned from all of her goings on with men, that is something, a power that she has to create a boundary or to keep herself safe.
And that she has to leave Laurel because she has had some kind of entanglement sexually or romantically with a student. And I don't know if I forgot that, but I certainly, maybe I did forget that. But I think it like, of course she is like stuck on people that were the age that she was when this first big event happened. And
Yeah.
also, I was thinking like everything about Blanche is fragile and frail, and I think she has learned more
Hmm.
than anyone how fragile and frail life is
Hmm.
from all the death around her. And this is probably the only group of people that she feels she has any degree of control or power over, which
Yeah.
is just so awful. And
Yeah. It's just such a tragedy her
mhm.
entire life.
Yeah,
Like everything from start to finish has just been sad for her.
and it
And
feels so common. It feels so
yeah.
deeply every day.
Yeah. And it's almost like, she says like I like the darkness. Like I find comfort in the darkness.
Yeah.
Like it's become something that she can like recoil into.
Yeah. It's so interesting because she, like, I think everything about her externally makes you think she wants to be seen. She is flirty. She's very, like, consumed with her
Hmm.
looks and yet wants to hide so desperately. And I think that, like, of
Yeah.
course you do if you go through that. Of course you want to just
Right.
shield yourself from absolutely everything. It's such a hard moment when Mitch turns her down.
Yeah. Because that's really, I wrote down in my notes that when they're talking that first conversation and then they go on their date, that is such an exciting experience for the reader to be like, oh wow, like I really hope like you're rooting for them.
Yeah.
You're really like they see each other, they both have, he's got a sick mom, like I think he had like a friend that passed away that
I think
like he
so,
had her
yeah.
cigarette case. And, they both experienced sorrow. And I think they recognize that in each other. And that's like such a refreshing thing. I don't know if it's trauma bonding,
It's
but
also
it's
like,
refreshing for them.
yeah, definitely. There is a level of like calculation, I think, as soon as she gets there, of like, I'm going to pin my sights on this one. But I think
Yeah,
it's also like, what is left for her? Like,
right.
Stanley immediately comes in citing property law, which is so
Yeah,
bonkers. And yet, I think, like, from the playwright standpoint, such a big thing because, like, what else does she have? Like, women couldn't
yeah,
get credit cards until the 70s.
I
You know?
know.
Like,
And she's still, like you said, she puts on this persona of like she comes in immediately and she tells Stella like, "Oh, you're like a plump little partridge and you have a stain on your collar and like only two rooms, like where is your maid?" And she's making all of these like outward gestures of like,
mm-hmm.
"Oh, you should be doing better," when literally all she has is a suitcase to
Yeah.
her name and that's it. And like she really is nobody to be talking about anyone's living
Mm-hmm.
quarters because she has no living
Yeah.
quarters. She really doesn't have anything. And I think it takes her a long time to really come to terms with that. And there's a level of shame that I think she has, and that's why she's so insecure. That's why she
Yeah.
doesn't want to be in the light. That's why she doesn't want people to see what's really going on. And she just like kind of smoke and mirrors with her and like just throw a tiara on it and some pearls and
Yeah.
then now you're a queen kind of thinking.
Yeah, and I think like the frustration Blanche with Stella at the very beginning is like, why aren't you ashamed of this? Why aren't you trying to keep up appearances? And yet
Mm-hmm.
that's all Stella is trying to do to Blanche throughout the entire thing of like,
Yeah.
it's okay, like this is exceptional. And I think what was also surprising to me is not only like Stanley's sexual appetite, but that really animalistic sex is the thing keeping them together, besides
Yeah.
like how shitty it is to be a woman in 1947.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that's really the glue of their relationship.
Yeah.
And even, in the end, when she's crying over Blanche after she's been taken away to the hospital, Stanley's comforting her. He's like, there, 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 there. And Tennessee Williams specifically writes in that he slips his hand in her blouse
Yeah.
even amidst like her crying over her sister being committed because her husband has like assaulted her and then now gaslit her into like thinking she's crazy and committed her. He's still like trying to like move in and like make it
Yeah.
like a sexy time. And it's like, what is going on here?
Yeah. And at the top of that scene was, I think, the most haunting line to me because Stella and Eunice are talking as like Blanche is, I think, in the bath, and Stella goes, I couldn't believe her story and go on living with Stanley. And then Eunice
Mm-hmm.
says, don't ever believe it. Life has got to go on. No matter what happens, you've got to keep on going.
Oh, that just gave me a chill. Like it's such a level of denial that people will live in just to keep their narrative alive and like protect whatever it is that they, their family or whatever it is that they are community they're trying to keep together, their reputation. The lengths that people will go to deny the truth is incredible.
Meeting that with such truth in this is
Yes.
so jarring and startling and wonderful and so necessary.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my notes to see, do I have anything to say other than wow.
Just wow. Yeah.
One of the first things Blanche says is, "You're all I've got in the world, and you're not even happy to see me." Like, I don't think at that point, like, the viewer really understands the truth of that statement.
Yeah.
You know, like you said, all she has is this suitcase, and she's so locked in the past. She even says, like, "I weigh what I weighed the summer you left Belle the summer Dad died, and you left us."
And she's been carrying this. She's holding on to this resentment, and think her anger for Stanley is not necessarily like just because he's common and he's violent and all of the reasons that she should find him detestable, but he represents what Stella left her for.
Exactly.
She left and she like created this life for herself and was just kind of like, all right, like I'm washing my hands of Bella Reeve, like this is your problem now. And she stayed. She stayed and she dealt with it and she saw all the horrors. And I think like there's something about that shows her character of like how compassionate she is and how she can't just like leave. She stays there with Stella because she's worried about her safety. Like
Absolutely.
at first when I read it, I thought like, oh, she's just staying because she has nowhere else to go. But then I'm like, well, what if she's staying because she's really like afraid of what will happen to Stella if she leaves?
One of the most iconic lines is the line before they black out to the sexual assault is, "We've had this date since the beginning." I think Blanche knew that this is happening to my sister and I have to stay here. And I think what struck me is that Blanche is the younger sister. And like you were saying, I think Blanche shows up, she comments on like how shitty the apartment is, how shitty Stanley is, how shitty all of it is, and the underlying tone is like, "You left me for this?
Yeah.
This is it?" I suffered and probably was thinking about like, at least Stella has a great life. At least Stella got out. And this is what you've been doing the whole time.
Right. You've been like dealing with this man that clearly is not treating you well. And like you came from such, not saying that like if you're wealthy, that's better. Like there was a lack of violence and a lack of like the crude behavior and like just I grew up in upstate New York when I read this, and I totally identified with just like feeling like surrounded by these barbarians. Like it was very much like a culture in high school of like, if you're a jock, you're cool, and like getting into fights was cool, and like this sort of primal like celebration of like the primal things. And I was so opposite from that, like I was an artist, I was quiet, I was reclusive, I was just like, why is everybody so like violent and like nobody's appreciating the art, nobody's appreciating the beauty. Like I totally understand still where she was coming from in the like the craving of culture and just the finer things in life when like all you are surrounded by are these people that like just want to go to the football game or whatever, like just hang out and drink beer, and that's like kind of the most satisfying thing they could do.
As bleak as the play is, I think like Blanche, similar to what you're saying, is like there has to be something better and bigger than this. And I think Stella is such a tragic character because she is so resigned to it and is like, this is life and this is what it is. And I think it's amazing that Blanche like still, I mean, of course she does because it's how you survive, is still clinging on to like there has to be something better because she has seen so much awful stuff and like of course is so worn down because like the human mind and the human body can only handle so much, and yet like has been such a survivor and is so strong to even get here.
And I think, like, to your point, Stella completely just like has rolled over and like just accepted this life. Like, she, even in the first scene, she's like, "Can I go watch you bowl?"
Yeah.
And that is such a typical like wife role of just like, I'm not even going to play. I'm going to watch you play.
And I have to get permission to watch you play.
May I watch you play? And he's like, all right, you know, like, she's just a bystander in his life. Everything is his life and his poker games and his bowling team and his work. And she's just home.
Yeah.
And she doesn't do much. And like, it's such a testament of the time that was the role of women. You know, when you're a wife, like, it's your husband's life that you just get to, you're blessed to be a part of.
Yeah. The greatest gift is being able to endure.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So good.
I mean, she has no friends. He's gone all the time with his job, which is also, like, on one hand, what a blessing that this is not, I guess, her every day. Although Eunice and Steve, I think, are upstairs doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Being just as abusive. And now she's pregnant. And now, like, she's...
I know.
Now, not only is there a child for Stanley to also be violent towards, when Stella is by herself, she doesn't even get that time to herself. Like, there is going to be another life that she has to put her own aside for to take care of.
Right. And the fact that he's violent to her while she's carrying this child is just like I don't think I really
sacred.
I did not really grasp that the first time I read it as a teenager. I was just like, he's a wild person, you know, he's just very like, he's very eccentric. But then I like, once we kind of have gone through all of these things, like the Me Too movement, and like really had like a reckoning with the behavior that we've accepted of the patriarchy, I think that has brought a new lens to this play. And reading it again and like watching the movie again, like I remember after the Me Too movement, when I went through my own like personal like reckoning of my truth and healing process, going to therapy and my various like healing modalities, then I was really like, oh wow, like Stanley is toxic masculinity, like personified. Like he is the archetype of how we got here. These men that have been allowed this whole time.
And I'm still on Tumblr, and of course I'm on Old Hollywood Tumblr. And you see thirst traps about Marlon Brando playing Stanley Kowalski. And yeah, beautiful man. What? What on earth? Like,
I know.
That was the thing of like, you were missing the point. You were missing the point so hard.
I know. And I remember finding him attractive when I was a teenager. I was like, oh, wow, he's so hot. Like, and meanwhile, he's like literally like the epitome of all that is like wrong with society and what's overlooked just because he's sexy, you know, and his sex appeal. And like, I find that so fascinating. And now looking back, I'm like, sure, I recognize he's an attractive person, but I'm like repulsed by his character. It's disgusting.
Yeah, I remember I realized I was queer my senior year of high school, and I remember like looking up, like, you're so desperate for representation, looking up like bisexual celebrities, list of bisexual people throughout history, and I was like, oh great, Marlon Brando was probably bi. Nice. It's like, just what a sad state.
Yeah, it was a real reach for trying to find his humanity. Yeah, I think I did read that he is, or he was bi and possibly gay. I don't know. It's for him to know, but
something I really love, I think, then and now from a writing perspective, is how masterfully Williams like doles out information bit by bit. Like, also recently did Catcher in the Rye, was editing that up until like a couple days ago. There's with that is so much talk about phony and authenticity and truth, and I think like through all of Blanche's delusions, she is one of the most truthful characters in it, because she is able to, the only person I think she is really truly delusional about is herself, and that is because she has to be to survive.
It's a self-preservation. Yeah, I was noticing that too in a lot of like the character analysis of Blanche. Like, there was one I like watched a man did of her that was like, oh, she's like completely delusional and like she's not in touch with reality. And I was like, did we like
Yeah.
watch the same thing? Like, are you kidding me? Like, she's the only one that's like, hang on, guys, like, what's
Yeah.
happening here? And she's brave to call it out and to say something, to speak truth to people that they're all in a
Yeah.
community together. You know, she's the odd person out, and she still has the courage to speak the truth and to say, like, this is not okay.
With her saying, like, the only way you can get through to this man is with sex, she enters that situation probably fully aware that this violence will be visited upon her at some point.
Yeah.
And stays for as long as she does.
And probably for the sake of her sister, because she's such a devoted person that has so much compassion for people that are of need.
Yeah, and she stays, I think, how much of her staying is out of obligation, staying with Belle Reve and everyone dying, which she describes losing people as violent. She says, I took the blows in my face and body, which I think is such a, like, what a way to talk about trauma, like, even then. And yet she is suffering so much for, like, the things that are really truly beautiful about her is her capacity to care and to hope and to believe that there is something better. And those are the things that get her carted away.
Yep. All she's trying to do with her delusions, or just speaking of these like fantasies, she's just trying to create something as it ought to be. That's what she says. She's like, I don't want to say things as they are. I want to say them as they ought to be. And I think that's like, you know, powerful manifestation work.
Yeah.
Like, that's how you make change. And, you know, she's a thought leader on that. She really has a grasp that like your mind is powerful, and that if you speak things into existence and you say them as they ought to be, like, you can help yourself through the most unthinkable realities.
Everything is so out of her control.
Yeah.
Like, at least my mind, of all things, can try to be a safe place and a safe and comfortable place.
Yeah, absolutely. She's truly a magical creature that I just keep, she's like a beacon to me. Like, I find her so strong. And even though like she's described as fragile, she has a lot of strength.
Oh my God, yeah. To live this far to get here. Like, even, I don't know geography that well, but like Mississippi and Louisiana I think are touching, but she still has to get, like, physically things are so difficult for her. She gets from one place to another. Like,
and she's so tiny and frail.
And does it on her own. Even like in 1947, even today, like, there is so much danger in just a woman being on your own traveling.
Oh, absolutely.
Something I noticed is, I think in the scenes leading up to the assault, she is singing Paper Moon in the background, and the line that she keeps repeating is like, it's something like, it would be so beautiful if you'd believe in me. Jesus Christ.
Yes. And she recognizes in herself her own worth in that end, you know, scene before the assault. Like, she's like, I know that like I carry the treasures of the world in my heart, and I have the capacity to love and all of these things. Like, she knows her beauty is fleeting, and totally relate to being a woman over 30 and like clinging on to youth, but she also knows with that insecurity she has her worth, and she has her knowledge and her love of culture and beauty. And that's like so much that she has to offer as a person.
My next question is right at the end, sort of, what do you make of the kindness of strangers line?
Oh, that, I know, it's such a elusive line. I think that line to me is based on just what she's had to go through with her family and the people that he doesn't really go into the backstory of her parents and the rest of her family, but it seems like everyone has kind of been selfish in her family from the brief descriptions that we get. And it doesn't seem like anyone was as kind and sensitive as Blanche. So for her, I think she's really looked for that outside of her immediate family and really just depended on the kindness of strangers, in that that's where she has sought out love and acceptance and being recognized. And I think it really shows in that final scene with the doctor when he just, the way he looks at her, and it's like she feels seen. Like you can
Yeah.
see, and Vivian Lee is such an incredible actress
Mm-hmm.
that like the way her face changes
Yeah.
when she's like on the floor and then she's let go and then he gives her his arm. She feels like she's respected, like a lady.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's totally like her element of she just needs kindness. For God's sake, just be nice to this woman.
Mm-hmm.
Stop beating her up.
I know, and I almost want to read it as a positive thing of like he's treating her with kindness, like she is leaving the situation, and maybe
Yeah.
like in the best of worlds, maybe an institution is going to be a place with kindness, but you know it's
Yeah.
not. You know
Yeah,
it's
it's
not.
probably not. And, I would love, in my mind, I would love that the after
Yeah.
story of Blanche is that she's doing so much better and thriving and like taking care of herself. I mean, she already has such a ability for self-care with like her long baths, and like she knows how to give herself what she needs and calm her nerves. Obviously, the alcohol is not a
Yeah.
great
But
solution,
you're
but
right. Like she has self-soothing mechanisms. She
yeah, she
has
has the awareness for
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
She knows that that's what she needs. And I think, for me as a, as a codependent, I always feel like I need to extend myself to the outside and take care of others first. And I think that's probably something that she's felt as well, that she needs to like go outside of herself for love. And like it's probably very hard for her to learn just to be okay as she is.
Yeah. Like you said, I think has to rely on the kindness of strangers because the people close to her will not give it to her.
Yeah.
And having to rely on the kindness of strangers, inevitably you will be disappointed because that
Mm-hmm.
kindness will run out, because it won't go far enough, because they leave your life for whatever reason. So at the same time, how often is this woman getting let down? And how does that
Yeah.
impact your own vision of yourself?
And I think like as someone who's like gone through so much healing with my trauma, I've learned that what your mind and your system is craving after a trauma will keep repeating itself, and you'll keep facing these situations, and these patterns that keep happening will go on forever until you face like the real solution that you need to get to. And I hope that someday I know Blanche is fictional, but I still am like, I hope someday she gets to the place where she can
Yeah.
finally face what she really needs to heal in all of this and just love herself and like realize she doesn't need to go to all these men for affection and lean on people outside of herself. Like she just needs some good Brene Brown and, some
Yeah.
self-help books to get through
Yeah.
it.
I don't know why this sort of didn't occur to me until now, but like it's not quite specified if she is like a sex worker, like if she is receiving money or anything, but she
Yeah.
is having this like revolving door of men in this hotel, and it's like, of course she is looking for anywhere, like anything,
Yeah.
any shoulder to cry on, because what's left? Every
Yeah.
person that should have been there for her wasn't.
Yeah. And she's obviously like somebody that feels like she loves to be social and she loves to be a presence for others. And without someone else, like, what is there? Yeah, absolutely. She's such a fantastic character. And I'm so glad that I was able to revisit her in this way. It's kind of made me realize how needed she was in my life at that time when she was introduced, in the 11th grade, and then just on my own personal journey. Like, it's fascinating how I've noticed that I have gravitated toward like people and characters that resonate, and I don't even know why. Like, I used to love Alanis Morissette and like Fran Drescher and Pamela Anderson, and now like Blanche Dubois, and I didn't really understand like exactly why I loved these characters, and learning their history, that they've all gone through their own traumas and sexual traumas, and the resonance that has. It's just proof of this collective consciousness that is seeking healing, and that even though things are unspoken, like there's a way that you move about the world when you've experienced something, and that is something other people resonate with, and that's what makes plays like this and art so important, because it's a way to express ourselves and what we've gone through and be seen in our truth, so that others can feel seen, and to help others along their journey. And they might not even know why it's helping them, but they're like, wow, like I get it now one day.
What a gift to be not alone, man, and what a gift from that teacher. Oh my god.
Oh, Miss Kaiser, shout out to you. I actually ran into her when I was home one year and visiting my nephew at like a skating rink, a roller skating rink. And she came up to me and was like, oh, I remember you. Like, Krista, hi, how are you? And I told her, I work in the arts and I'm writing now. And she was like, of course you are. You were always so artistic. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, she always saw me, and she just got it. And I'm so thankful for her for giving me all that she did.
Would you consider it required reading?
Yeah, I would. I mean, it's intense for high school. I know in these times people are very sensitive, so there's a lot of triggering topics in it. But I think for like drama school, the writing is so fantastic, and the characters, how perfectly he builds the tension between them and crafts each line to reveal so much and to create such a gradual escalation throughout the acts, I think is some of the best playwriting out there.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I would.
And I think, like, what a doofus move of my public education system that trying to introduce kids to theater through Shakespeare. Love Shakespeare. Great.
Yeah.
So inaccessible to young people. Just, like, it is such a block, the language. And you get there eventually, but, like, not this for 6th graders, obviously. But, like, putting them in 21st century and 20th century theater, I think, would just foster such an earlier love and appreciation for it.
Yeah, and I think there's something really Shakespearean about this play and the tragedy of it all.
Yeah.
And the lines are just as iconic, and the characters have similar archetypes, and the violence and the people that just want peace, and all of these sort of themes that are very Shakespearean are all throughout. So definitely just as good as Shakespeare.
Oh my god.
way easier to read for me.
Yeah. As a 7th grader, I did not understand A Comedy of Errors, and that's also just a very confusing play.
Yeah. I don't think I read that one. I think we read Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth, and that was it.
Yeah. We did those two. That was 9th and 10th grade. We were supposed to do Much Ado About Nothing in 8th grade, and our teacher, who was amazing, was undergoing like breast cancer and radiation therapy. And so at the end of the year, she was just like, guys, I'm going to put on a movie of it. Please let that be enough. And we were like, Miss Baskin, you crawled through a window one time. We love you. You can do anything.
Wow.
She rode a moped to school, and we had our first period, and one time she was like a little late, and I was like, I can't get in. They locked me out. And so we opened the window for her to crawl through. And she like couldn't get her helmet through.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Baskin.
That reminds me of one of my English teachers, Miss Borst. She was like short and like shorter than most students, and like a lot of people thought she was a student. And like she told us, she's like, one day I want to live in an Earth ship. We were just like, what are you talking about? And like now it's like it makes sense, like, years later. I'm like, she was ahead of her time, that like Earth ships are like made of all like reused materials, and like it's very like eco-friendly and like sustainable. It's a house that sustains itself. And I'm like, brilliant. That's
What a
where we should
visionary.
be. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's a total visionary. We all should want Earth ships. There's just so many great lines.
Oh my god. It is a text that you can spend. I'm sure someone out there has been like, spend a whole semester on just this play.
Yeah,
I get it.
like Blanche's lines are just so good. Like, the little there is belongs to people that experience some sorrow. Like, just so good. I made notes about like Mitch's judgment of Blanche. How in the beginning he was like, poker shouldn't be played in a house with women.
Mm-hmm.
And then he later is telling Blanche, like, you're not clean enough to be in the house with my mother. And these sort of like just blanket judgments of like, poker is too filthy to be played with women, but now Blanche is so filthy she can't be in a house with his mother. So essentially he's relating her, like, she's as filthy as like gambling and poker. Yeah, like she's this like seedy person that like,
and that like he really truly sees her as something beautiful, and then receives like one piece of information and completely flips.
Yeah, and it's so easy for him to just be like, oh, now you're a soiled woman that is no longer fit to even be in a house with my mom. Like, what?
My mother, who's almost dead, who is
literally
like,
she would be ask your mother, she would be thrilled. She'd be like, every woman has a past, let her in. I'll accept her with open arms. I guarantee Mitch didn't even speak to his mother about this. No. It's his own bias that like he feels she's unfit because he has these like preconceived notions in his head of what's okay and what's not okay.
Yeah.
Mitch. That was something that really like, I was really rooting for Mitch, but then after that I was like, and then he tries to like, you know, he's like, oh, I want to do other things with you. And that I was just like, okay, so now she's not clean enough to be in the house with your mom, but you'll still like, what?
Yeah. What a disappointment.
Anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, I think that's all. Is there anything you'd like to plug? Where can people find you if you want to be found?
So you can find me mostly on Instagram these days at Krista.Moy is my handle. I'm sometimes on Twitter. You can fleetingly at Moy Tweets World. Instagram, I post where I'm doing my latest shows, stand up, and all that stuff. Yeah, come find me, read my stuff.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was such a delight to revisit and such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was such a gift, and I love required reading. And
thank you.
It's the best podcast of 2023. Yes.
Oh, man. Well, on that, have a good night. Thank you so much.
I've had such a delight revisiting my childhood and just like going into that time in my life and just being like, what was I thinking and doing? Like, it was just so interesting to unfold all of it.
That's what matters to me is I want to give something to you, you know?
And that's it. That's the episode. This episode is coming out on my birthday. Thanks. Next week, next week is Twilight by Stephanie Meyer with special guest April Consolo. You know, I only have a couple hours to post this on time on Wednesday, so I gotta go. Love ya! This is Erin. You can find me everywhere at Erin R. Bowles. The R stands for riches, an embarrassment of riches to live another year. All right, something weird is happening on CSI. I gotta go. Bye, love ya.